Welcome back, everyone, to the VS Code Insiders podcast. You're behind the scenes of everything VS Code. I'm your host, James Montemagno, a PM on our developer community team. And today I have one of my best friends in the entire world, the one and only Toby Padilla. How's it going, Toby?
Hi, James. Thank you for the warm intro. It's super great to be here.
I am super excited. Now, funnily enough, like you and I only met. It's kind of like, I swear, it's kind of like talking about like what model you're using. I don't know what it was, a Tuesday. I'm probably using a new model. You and I only actually, I think, met in person at Build on our MCP panel. And then I was like, wow, Toby's like amazing. So cool. I didn't know anything about you. And maybe some of our listeners don't. Do you want to give a little TLDR about what you're doing at GitHub?
Sure. So I'm Toby Padilla. I'm a principal product manager at GitHub. I am in charge of our MCP initiatives. And so this is the GitHub MCP server, the new registry that we launched. I'm also on the MCP steering committee for the as a maintainer for the open source MCP Registry. And we can talk today about how all of these things wire up. I'm relatively new. I started in December last year, so I'm coming up on my first year. It's been an amazing journey. And James and I, we were just chatting about how much has changed in this year, right? Like we're moving super fast now. We have one of the most popular MCP servers in the world. We have a super popular registry. The agent stuff is coming out. We've got Copilot coding agent. There's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. And so it's been a good journey. Prior to that, I was the founder of Charm, which is a very popular open source command line startup. And before that, I was the VP of mobile for TweetDeck and Last.fm, and way back in the day as an engineer at Apple. So it's been a long time in the industry, but to see these changes in the last 12 to 24 months, it's probably been the most exciting time in tech since I was like 8 years old using a VIC-20 back in the day.
It's so cool too, because pretty much every product that you've worked on, I've used. So
okay, great.
Well, let's talk about MCP, Model Context Protocol. Now, if people, every blog, we have to say what it is. So, Toby, what is Model Context Protocol, and how are you using MCP servers today in your actual workflow?
So, MCP, Model Context Protocol, is a way for LLMs to interact with the outside world. And this means sort of primarily two things. One is they can fetch context, they can fetch data, right? And so if you think about how an LLM works, it had a cutoff date when it was trained, and anything past that cutoff date or anything that was private won't be accessible to the LLM. So think of MCP as a way for it to go out and fetch either private information or more recent information. You can say, what are the top 5 things on Hacker News, for instance? And it could go get that from like right now. The other thing it can do is it can create side effects. It can interact with the outside world. So it can create a repo on GitHub. It can create a pull request. It can create a Figma file. So it's really the LLM's way to interact. And the history there is kind of interesting because there was a function calling API for a lot of these models, right? Like OpenAI had this function calling API, and it was essentially the same thing, but it wasn't standardized. It was sort of proprietary to each model. And Anthropic, about a year ago now, did the hard work of creating the standard. And one of the ways they sort of bootstrapped the standard was they created like 20 or 30 reference servers themselves. And one of those reference servers was the GitHub MCP server. And they told us it was the most popular of all the reference servers. And so we took ownership of that from them and put it out there. And just like we said, it's a way for LLMs not to interact with GitHub and the GitHub platform. And you see a lot of these for a lot of services, right? Like they're kind of wrapping REST APIs, or they're doing even better and they're putting agentic workflows together as tools. The ones I use a lot are the GitHub MCP server. I use Playwright a lot as well. And for people who aren't familiar with that, this is a Microsoft MCP server that gives LLMs the ability to browse the web. And that's a super amazing thing, right? It's like the LLM like driving through websites. And the way I use these is primarily through the Copilot coding agent. And so, James, you and I were talking about this earlier today. There's a bunch of ways you can do agentic development, right? Like you can have an agent in VS Code or Cursor, Claude Code. You can be on the command line. There's a bunch of different things you can do. My preferred way is to use GitHub itself. And so for those who aren't familiar, the Copilot coding agent is a feature where you can assign an issue to Copilot, and it churns away for like 20 minutes, and it'll come back and it'll open up a pull request with what you wanted in there. And if you want to change that or it got something wrong, you just leave comments to it. And you're like, hey, at Copilot, I actually want 13 color themes instead of like the 6 that you added, or you got this wrong. I want to use SQLite instead of MongoDB. And then it'll go back and it will do another commit on the PR. Well, the Copilot coding agent is MCP enabled, and by default, it has two MCP servers installed. One is the GitHub MCP server, and the other is Playwright. And it uses the GitHub MCP server for all of its interaction with GitHub. So as it's doing commits, as it's looking through the history of files, as it's looking at other repos, it's using the GitHub MCP server there. And then if you're building a web app, it uses Playwright to like take screenshots of it to test the functionality that it implemented. And it's kind of incredible because a lot of the times you'll get back a pull request from the coding agent and it'll have a screenshot of what it just built. And it used Playwright for that. And it validated at least a lot of the user flows through this web application by using Playwright. So for me, the combination of those three things, the coding agent, the GitHub MCP server, and the Playwright MCP servers really unlocks some pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, that's super cool. And the cool part of MCP is like you were talking about is it's not just for coding. It's in a bunch of different things, right? So a bunch of different editors. Like I use VS Code, but also there's different desktop apps that can connect to it. And that's the idea is it's a universal standard that's out there. So when you go to the Model Context Protocol website, which we'll put in the links below, you'll see all that stuff. Yeah, like for me inside of VS Code, just yesterday, I have my Blazor website and I was like, hey, I really want to optimize my static assets. So I just said, I had the Microsoft Learn MCP server. I said, go search the docs. It pulled down the docs. And then I said, hey, go create a plan. So I'm inside of just my Ask mode inside of VS Code. I'm like, cool. Now go break this down into like 5 digestible GitHub issues and then go open those for me. And the GitHub MCP kicks in and it does it, right? I could manually do that in VS Code, but I don't want to waste my keystrokes. I just go and do it, right? And then the last thing I said, okay, let's go ahead and figure out which one has like the most kind of viable, like, the first order of operation, go ahead and assign that to the coding agent and then go and do it, right? All from without leaving my IDE, which is super cool. And like you said, I do that a lot, which is like I'm implementing a new web, component. And then I'm like, all right, you've implemented it, Copilot. Now go do end-to-end testing on that with Playwright. And then it just like tests it. So it can validate itself. It's so cool. And there's a bunch of them out there. And if you're not using these things, give it a try. Even with those simple ones, like the GitHub MCP one, is like blows my mind. And there's a bajillion tools in there. When I say tools, are kind of like function calls, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I think that ends up becoming like the problem of what we actually want to talk about today, which is like finding, managing, and going off. So we just like talked about this, but then like, where do people go? Like, how do you find it, right? And you talked about earlier about this MCP registry, and then we have our own MCP registry. There's a bunch of registries. Like, we know about MCP now, but like, what is this registry? How did it come about? Right? Because it's not inherently from us that you were talking about with the team. And how has it evolved since like the need for a registry evolved?
Yeah, that's a really good overview of the sort of messy situation we found ourselves in, right? So again, a year ago, Anthropic creates MCP, and it just starts taking off like wildfire. After their initial set of MCP servers, people just started like cranking things out because it's actually pretty easy to make a local MCP server. It's just a command line tool. It just wraps some stuff, and all it does is it presents a function, like when you said a tool is a function to the LLM, a text description of what that function does. So if we say get pull request is the function, and then the description is goes to GitHub and gets the pull requests, and then it has a JSON schema for arguments. And so the LLMs have been sort of fine-tuned on this. So it's really easy to make these things. And so you saw just an explosion of them. And what you also saw was an explosion of registries to collect these things, right? Because the problem is exactly what you said. Okay, now everyone's making MCP servers. Everyone's really excited about it. How do you find them? And so a lot of just like third parties and independent developers and open source people started making registries. Like Pulse MCP was one of them. Glamma AI was another one. But it became a problem for publishers, right? Like we have the GitHub MCP server. We do a new release. How do we update these 12 or 13 registries that are out there? And there's sort of more registries coming out every day. So the MCP steering committee got together and said, let's solve this and let's create a single point of truth where publishers can push their MCP servers into any updates for their MCP servers. We have all the information required to install these MCP servers in this API. And then a bunch of downstream registries can pull from this, because our goal with this open source canonical registry that we're building with the MCP steering committee is not to be an end destination for users. It's meant to be an end destination for publishers. So we publish into this, and then a bunch of downstream registries pull from this API. And one of those registries is the GitHub MCP registry. doesn't pull from this yet because we're still in preview mode of the open source registry, but we're working with them and I should say us because I'm on both sides of this equation to get when you publish shows up in the GitHub MCP registry. So the GitHub MCP registry, which we just launched 2 weeks ago now, is a curated set of high quality servers just to bootstrap and get the thing out there, right? And then when we're confident that the open source registry is done changing the API shape, we've worked through all the issues because we're really building it in public, then we're going to sit the GitHub MCP registry on top of it. And part of this flow is that you publish as a publisher in the open source registry, downstream registries, GitHub, Goose Extensions Marketplace, Cursor, all these things pull from it. And then they enhance that data with platform specific information. So for us on the GitHub side, that means adding star counts. It means displaying the READMEs. It means one-click installs in the VS Code and VS Code Insiders and Visual Studio and in IntelliJ and all of our first-party platforms. And it means linking back to the repos so we can sort of get this flow going of people discovering and contributing to these MCP servers. And so that's the overall vision in all of this, and we're kind of marching it forward. The great thing about MCP, the ecosystem in general, is that it's very organic, right? Like a lot of this is open source. All of this is being built in public. We put something out, people find problems, they open issues, we fix them. So it's really a work in progress. And if you want to be involved, you can go to the link that we'll add to this, and you can just start chiming in. You can even do a pull request on it. And start publishing to the server and just banging on it. And we actually have a Discord as well for the MCP steering committee that you can join and chime in there. But it's kind of a very fun, very organic, very early stage ecosystem thing with a bunch of different open source people working together, large companies like GitHub and Microsoft and OpenAI and Anthropic. And it's a very cool mix of a bunch of different sized entities. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think that's one of the cool parts about it because I work with Den quite a lot on things, and he's been on, many of our live streams and talking about SpecKit and a bunch of other stuff. And MCP, of course, we presented a build together with Katie on my team, and it was super fun. And we were on the panel together. I'm very fascinated about this registry because I think when, at least for me as a developer, I think of a registry, I think of like NuGet and NPM, right? And these different CocoaPods and all these different things. Is inherently like, should we think about it the same way? Like if I'm going in and I built a library, in this case, an MCP, like is right now today, for example, like I have my Monkey MCP server, which is great. And I also have one for my feedback flow application. But inherently today, what I'm doing is I am doing two things. One, I have, I'm publishing it to Docker Hub so people can pull it down if they want it locally on their machine. But I'm also publishing it up to Azure Functions as a public endpoint for a remote MCP server. So I have both of those things available based on what people want to use there. And mostly as a sample, just to like show that you can do both of them. But that's where I stopped. Like, do I think about this registry as like another place to publish? Do I have to do something in my repo? Like it's on GitHub, it's in the README. Like, just pick it up and like put it somewhere. Like, what do I got to do as a developer to actually like interact with this registry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so one thing about this registry is they're kind of meta registries. And so this has the information about your server, but like you said, you're publishing the Docker Hub and you have a remote version of this, right? And so what you'll do is you'll use a command line tool from this open source project and create you can do publisher init, and it'll create a server JSON, which is a manifest for your MCP server, name, identifier, and remote and local server information. So you'll actually put the Docker command in there that you'll need the clients to run locally, and the URL for your remote MCP server endpoint. So we're not actually hosting any of the binaries or anything like that in this registry. We're just pointing to other registries, NPM, Docker Hub, NuGet, right? Like all of this kind of stuff. So what you as a server author would do, get the command line tool from the open source registry, init a server JSON, edit it so it has all of your information, all of the flags that you need in Docker, the endpoint for your remote URL, the description for your server, and then you publish it to the open source registry. And then all of the downstream registries will sync from that, and it'll show up in all these different platforms.
Okay. I think that really, at least for me, like unlocked a whole lot. And we definitely need a blog post on that. That is for sure. But I think that mind shift, because I was just thinking about that when you were saying in real time, is for people that are listening is, you can build MCP servers and tons of programming languages, right? NPM is specific for like the web, JavaScript, right? And then, NuGet is specific for .NET, right? But inherently, you're right. MCP servers might be on a plethora of remote servers, or they could be a NuGet package. It could be a Docker thing. They could be on any registry, right? It's like any Docker thing, or it could be an NPM package, or, install with pip or whatever, right? For Python. Mm-hmm. So that's really fascinating that it's really just this file that's connecting up to it. And then what decides, because there is this, and I really want to dive deeper onto this, because inherently, like you said, there's meta, there's registries built on top of registries. So like, how should we think about like the open source registry versus like the GitHub registry versus other registries out there? And like, why do so many of them exist, for example?
That's a good question too. And so a lot of this has to do with the multiple platforms, right? And so with the GitHub MCP registry, not only can you browse it on github.com, but the API behind it powers the in-app browsing inside of VS Code. So if you're in VS Code and you want to install an MCP server, it's going to hit the GitHub registry, which in turn is hitting the open source registry to get all of the MCP servers eventually when we get there. And so you're seeing this inside of VS Code, and you can imagine Windsurf wants this, Goose wants this, right? Like, so that users don't have to exit their experience when they want to install an MCP server. They're inside their IDE, they're inside their clients, they're browsing for tools to install. And so you'll see all of these different platforms want a slightly different view or different information about it that's relevant and pertinent to their users, that they're going to have to enhance this sort of baseline. Oh, here's how you install from Docker, and here's the remote endpoint. Great. Pass that to the GitHub MCP registry. Well, it's got 10,000 stars, and here's the README. Pass it to the Goose Extensions Marketplace. Well, here's a button to install it in Goose, right? And so you see these integrations for end users as close to the developer, or in some cases non-developer, as they can possibly get. And so it's this chaining and federation of MCP registries to get there. And we may even see more interesting composition there, where it's like someone goes from the open source registry, we at GitHub enhance it with star count, and then maybe a security company has a security scan that they do on all of the MCP servers, or maybe we end up doing that as well. And then they take our registry data and they enhance it, right? And so you can start to make a more rich data set when you start passing these things through specialized services or products and platforms that have domain specific expertise.
And then if you're like a enterprise, for example, right, does it mean that you maybe would have like our own internal like Microsoft registry, or like company whatever registry? Like if I'm a company and I want to kind of maintain a list just for my developers, like is that kind of like the vision that we kind of see here in a way?
Yes. And that's actually one of the biggest blocking points and asks that we've heard from customers and partners in the enterprise space, right? They may have regulatory standards that they have to meet. They may have private information that they're very concerned about getting exfiltrated someplace. So they don't want to just allow all of the people on their intranet and all of their developers or employees to just install random MCP servers, right? If some teenager in Kansas cranks out Death XXX MCP, you don't necessarily want that going into your bank's workflow, right? And so what they want is a validated set of MCP servers that they've maybe done security audits on, that they have a business relationship with the publishers. Maybe they're only comfortable with like the GitHub MCP server and the Figma MCP server, right? And so what they want is governance around MCP. And they also will probably, in a lot of cases, have developed internal MCP servers that won't be available outside of the company. And so they won't be in any of these public registries, right? Well, one of the goals of this open source registry product is to define a standardized API for registries. And so what we're telling people to do, and what we're adding support for inside of GitHub, is the ability to expose any of these registries that adhere to the standardized API and to use it as a governance allow list for MCP usage inside your enterprise. So something that we launched a week ago was the public preview in GitHub, where any enterprise or org admin can go in and set the URL for any registry that adheres to the standard, and it will act as an allow list. And this is, again, super early, so it's enforced in VS Code and VS Code. I think only VS Code Insiders currently, and it's working its way into VS Code mainline. And that will be the MCP servers that are installable by people who are members of this org or this enterprise. And so starts to add this governance layer of not only MCP servers that you're comfortable with your employees using, but internal MCP servers that wouldn't be in these things. But again, it's coming through the same format, right? Like the same open API that's being defined in this open source project.
That's super cool, because even internally how we work, there are tons of MCP servers internally that teams have built that are in helping different teams do different things inherently for 1P, right? Internally, first party, like at Microsoft and at GitHub. So yeah, we would never publish those out onto the internet, but we have our internal feed, kind of like we have our own internal feeds of like, early builds of .NET or different things that we're doing or private things that are out into the world as well. So it's our own private. That's really cool to think about. And you talked a little bit about the integration. So you have the registry URLs, you have this governance, you have the extension, you can say at MCP and then browse MCPs. And then there's also a GitHub website, right? Like where do people go to actually browse this? I mean, obviously inside of VS Code, but also outside of VS Code too, right? And
yep. If you go to github.com/MCP, you'll see our, right now, again, it's a curated list, but ultimately this is going to be where we show all of the open source MCP servers, or the public MCP servers, I should say, because they don't necessarily have to be open source, that have been published to the open source registry.
Very cool. Now, is this thing evolving? What's the future of MCP registries in your mind to kind of like capstone this in a way? You know what I mean? Like, where is this going? Because it really, I mean, this thing just happened. I think we announced it, I think at the MCP Dev Days a few months ago. Now it's like a reality, and this thing is happening. It's early days, but like, what's next? Like, what are you already hearing, and what's the team, the entire steering committee working on next?
I think two big areas for innovation and sort of adoption. One is the governance in the enterprise, right? Because a lot of big companies are very excited about MCP, but they're just not able to use it until there's a governance layer. And so I think you'll see registries play a huge role in getting the sort of corporate adoption of MCP servers. On sort of the more fun side of things, I really do think that we'll see an MCP server in front of these registries to allow agents to discover and find tools at runtime, install them to complete a task, and then maybe do away with them. And maybe it's not even just a full MCP server. It could be a subset of tools. You can imagine like, hey, I want to get a design done and do some coding. It's sort of abstract. And then it's like, okay, Figma does design, and the GitHub MCP server can allow me to do coding. I'm going to take these 6 tools from Figma, these 5 tools from the GitHub MCP server, constitute a virtual MCP server on the fly, and then present it for just this one circle and round through the LLMs. And then when the user says that they want to add a login flow, then I'm going to go find something else and do the same thing, right? So the registries are going to be the raw input to making that kind of use case become a reality.
I love that. I love that is a great way to end it, because that, I think, to me, I see it in my workflow. Like, I don't want to have to go sometimes even find the thing. It can recommend the things for me. It's like when, agent is just like running commands, like, I can build, I can test, I can run these things. I can start to run these commands for you. It's like, cool. Like, you're one step ahead of where I was going to do that next naturally, but you're one step ahead. Next step. Go find the MCP server. Like, if I'm asking you to go search documentation, go find the MCP server for the documentation. So, well, Toby, this is amazing. I'll put all the links in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming onto the pod and talking about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's super fun.
Yeah. And don't forget, everyone, that this is both podcast audio form, and you can also watch on the VS Code YouTube. If you enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe, do all the things, and spread the word. It's a new podcast out in the world. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues. Wow. More VS Code goodies into our eardrums every single week. All right, that's going to do it for this one. So until next time, I'm James, and happy coding.